Hi guys, so this is chapter 7 of the business communications class. This week we're talking about negative messages, and we talked about them a little bit last week, and that they're just the opposite of a positive. So you're going to give the indirect approach to writing a letter that has a negative message to be conveyed, and you only use the direct approach when you're writing a positive message. So, goals in communicating bad news. We want to strive for acceptance to help the receiver understand and accept the bad news. We want them to take the bad news in the best way possible. A positive image we want to promote. A good image of yourself and of the organization, and strive to reduce bad feelings and convey fairness, that you're treating your customers and those that are going to be upset as fairly as possible. Message clarity. Make the message so clear that no further correspondence is necessary. You don't want to have to keep communicating about the bad news. Just one communication should be all that should take. One email, one letter, whatever it is. And protection. You have to be really careful to avoid creating a legal liability, so try not to make a claim or specify any information that could lead to a lawsuit. And preventing legal problems, basically just avoid abusive language at all, because that can come back and haunt you. And then the only other thing you really have to worry about is defamation. It's a false published statement that harms an individual's reputation. And what someone can do is, they feel like their reputation has been hurt, they can sue for damages. As long as they can put a dollar amount to, say, if they lost customers because of something that was said that wasn't true, then it's a defamation suit. Defamation can either be libel or slander. And in the case of libel, it's written defamation. Celebrities sue for defamation all the time because of stuff that's written in magazines or tabloids. And slander is spoken defamation, something that was spoken to in an interview or a video or something like that. So examples are below. There's a lot of examples, though. It comes in all shapes and sizes. Avoiding careless language is very important. Avoid potentially damaging or easily misinterpreted statements. For example, the factory floor is too dangerous for visitors on field trips. Remember that you represent your organization. You are the face of your organization. So how people feel about you and your communication style is, they're also going to relate to the business you work for. So if they don't feel like you're very sensitive, they're going to think that the whole company in itself is kind of not sensitive in that way as well. So your business message must represent the views of the organization and try to leave out your personal views. Be careful about revealing company information, even in a personal blog. Remember that common reactions to negative information are going to be disappointment, irritation, and anger. For example, when goods cannot be delivered as promised, or there's a product that they bought has failed. If you're refusing credit, somebody applies for a loan and they didn't get it. Billing errors, somebody was charged too much money. Those are all going to result in disappointment, irritation, and anger. And what we try to do is reduce that disappointment, irritation, and anger by letting the reader know the reasons for the rejection. And as long as the bad news is revealed with sensitivity, then we can shrink that. So here's the indirect strategy for writing a bad news message. We want to communicate the bad news at the end and not the beginning. So use the indirect strategy to communicate bad news. Appeals to relationship-oriented writers who care about how a message will affect its receiver. It allows us to prepare the reader for delivering the bad news and softening the impact of the bad news. So the buffer is the first thing. What we're going to do is we're going to butter them up a little bit before we deliver them the bad news, so that the bad news is not received so harshly. So the best news possible should be given at the beginning. This is like giving the good news first and the bad news last. Start out with a compliment, appreciation, start out with an agreement. You can start out with facts or an understanding, empathy, or apology. Careful with the apologies because you don't want to admit neglection. Here's some quick checks. So how effective is this for an opening that refuses to grant credit? Unfortunately, your application for credit has been reviewed negatively. It's the direct approach, for one, so it's wrong in that aspect. It reveals it too bluntly and shows no sensitivity. We sincerely regret that we must deny your credit application. This one sounds phony and canned. It basically sounds like they copied and pasted it to a recording and you're just one of the many that got the letter that day. It's very impersonal. Another example, we are delighted to receive your application for credit. This one would be okay if they actually weren't denied credit, but instead they did get denied credit, so it gives the wrong impression that we are going to give them credit at the beginning of the letter, and at the end of the letter, we're going to tell them that we actually denied your credit application. The recent resurgence of interest in the stock market caught many of us by surprise. In the fact that we are denying these people credit, it is not relevant. It doesn't matter and has nothing to do with the refusal of credit. The next one is looking at how effective the following openings are for a letter that refuses a request for a donation. So somebody asks for donation money and we're refusing it. Your request for a monetary contribution has been referred to me for a reply. This fails to engage the reader. It sounds a little canned. It sounds a little impersonal. The next one, we appreciate the fine work your organization is doing to provide early childhood programs that meet the needs of parents and very young children. This one compliments the reader and implies that it's going to be approved, that they're going to give a donation, when in fact they're denying the donation. So we want to stay away from that. Presenting the reasons is the next thing. After the buffer, we talk about the reasons and why we're denying credit or why we're denying giving a donation. Be cautious in explaining. Cite reader benefits if possible. If there are any reader benefits, if you're giving them a discount, if you are going to possibly donate the next year. If there are any reader benefits, list them now. Explain company policy if it's relevant. Choose positive words, and actually company policy might have to do something with your homework this week. Show that the matter was treated seriously and fairly. And in revealing the bad news, reveal it with sensitivity and apply the following techniques for cushioning bad news. So here's the techniques we can use. We're going to go through them individually, but avoid the spotlight, use a long sentence, place the bad news in a subordinate clause, be clear but not overly graphic, imply the refusal, suggest a compromise or an alternative, use passive voice, which we've talked about, past chapters, and avoid the spotlight. So in avoiding the spotlight, put the bad news in the middle of the paragraph halfway through the message. Use a long sentence. Don't put the bad news in a short, simple sentence. It sticks out that way. Placing the bad news in a subordinate clause works really good too. That way you're getting good news and bad news at the same time. Although we have no opening for an individual with your qualifications at this time, we are pleased that you thought of us when you started your job search, so it ends in a very positive way, even though we're delivering bad news. Be clear but not overly graphic, so instead of saying, our investigation reveals that you owe these or 3 creditors large sums and that you were fired from your last job. This is clear on why they're not hiring this person, but it's overly graphic and unnecessary. So instead try that our investigation reveals that your employment status and your financial position are unstable at this time. Still not the greatest news, but it's definitely going to make somebody less mad than the first one. Implying the refusal, instead of saying we cannot contribute to your charity this year, try, although our profits must be reinvested into our company this year, we hope to be able to support your future fundraising activities. So it gives them a look into the future, saying we aren't just being mean, we need our money right now, and it's worth looking into the future. Suggest a compromise or an alternative. So although the cashmere sweater cannot be sold at the erroneously listed price of $18, we can allow you to purchase this $218 item for only $118. So the wrongly marked sweatshirt was not $18, it was $218. And in delivering the bad news that it's not $18, they're going to give you a little bit of good news with it, saying that they're going to mark it down some. So consider using passive voice verbs, and we've talked about this before. Passive voice verbs focus the attention on the actions rather than the personality. So we're going to put the subject and change it to the action. They're useful in being tactful. So instead of saying, and this is good for a positive message. For a positive message, we want to stay in the active voice. We cannot make a contribution at this time is active. In a negative message or a bad news message, we want the subject not to be we. We want it to be the contribution, so that it takes attention off of us. So try, a contribution cannot be made at this time. The active voice of I cannot allow you to return the DVD player because is active, and it is putting the blame on I. In the passive voice, it sounds much better. The blame is not personal. Return of the DVD player is not allowed because. Another example, Ryan checked the report, but he missed the error. It's putting all the blame on Ryan. And we want to say something like the report was checked, but the error was missed. Notice that passive voice verb phrases always include helper verbs such as is, are, was, were, been, being, all those. We want to use those, but not in a bad news message. Or we want to use them only in a bad news message, not in any deliverance of good news or requests. So here's an example of a helper verb forming a passive voice. The report was checked, the schedule is being revised, and invitations were sent. So here's to check ourselves real quick. I'm unable to make a cash contribution this year because of unusually high expenses. This is active. It's saying I. I is the subject. We want to make it passive by saying a cash contribution cannot be made this year because of unusually high expenses. Takes the blame off the subject. Another example, we cannot process your application this month. Instead of saying we cannot, we just say your application cannot be processed this month. You guys should be good at these. We've practiced them a lot. Here's an example. We sell our products only through franchised retailers. We is the subject, and it's active. Changing the subject to our products are sold only through franchised retailers takes the blame off of us personally. Another example, Mark made a programming error that delayed our project. Take the blame off of Mark and say a programming error was made that delayed our project. And here's the closing. Avoid endings that sound canned, insincere, inappropriate, or self-serving. Try to personalize the closing with a look to the future, an alternative to the refusal, and good wishes. Freebies are always nice. Anything you can give away for free or a discount. And resale or sales promotions, depending on the circumstance. So a writing plan for refusing routine requests or claims. Start with a buffer, obviously, a neutral statement on which both the reader and writer can agree, such as a compliment, an expression of appreciation, a quick review of the facts, or an apology. Try to include a key idea or word that acts as a transition into the explanation. List the reasons why you're refusing the claim or the request. Present valid reasons for the refusal, avoiding words that can create negative tones. Include resale or sales promotion if it's appropriate. Soften the blow by positioning the bad news strategically. So in the bad news section, use the passive voice, accentuating the positive or implying a refusal. Suggest a compromise or a substitute if it's possible. If there's any way you can make the bad news somewhat good news, this is the spot to do it. And in the closing, renew good feelings with a positive statement. Look forward to continued business. Avoid referring to the bad news at all. And you can click on these in your slides and you'll get an example of a effective refusal of request for cash refund. So they call it want a cash refund, or they write in wanted a cash refund. And if you click on the 7.0 document, the PDF file, it will pop up as an actual effective refusal. So it's a good example to go by. Controlling damage with disappointed customers. The first thing we want to do is call the individual involved. Second thing, we want to describe the problem and apologize. And then 3, explain. And whatever the situation is, just explain what happened, why the problem occurred, why or what you're doing to resolve the problem, and how you will prevent the problem from ever happening again to them or anyone else. Number 4, follow with a letter that documents details discussed in a phone call. It promotes goodwill, so you always want to be positive in promoting goodwill and promoting future service. And then you can click on the 7.0 document here to see a bad news follow-up message. In refusing credit, the 4 goals to convey credit refusals include avoiding language that causes hard feelings, retaining customers on a cash basis, so you don't want to lose them altogether just because they were denied credit. You still want them to come buy your products from you. Prepare for possible future credit without raising false expectations. So maybe you can give them a little counseling on what you can do to get credit. And then avoid disclosures that could cause a lawsuit. A little bit on number 3 though, don't say anything that will make them assume that if they do follow your orders that they will have credit granted to them. Just make suggestions. Delivering the bad news personally, gather all the information, prepare and rehearse it, explain past, present, and future, what happened, what's going on now, and what you're going to do in the future to make it better. Preparing is pretty important because when you're dealing with people that are upset, sometimes it's best to be practiced. Consider taking a partner with you in case it becomes a he said, she said. Think about timing. Is it a good time? Is it a bad time? Be patient with the reaction. When breaking bad news to employees, always open with a buffer, a neutral or positive statement that transitions to the reasons for the bad news. When dealing with employees, it's always best to start with a compliment and then work from there. Consider mentioning the best news, a compliment, appreciation, agreement, or solid facts. And show understanding always with employees. When giving the reasons, explain the logic behind the bad news, provide a rational explanation using positive words, and display empathy because they are your employees. Try to show the reader benefits if possible. Position the bad news so that it does not stand out. It's not the first thing they read. Be positive, but don't sugarcoat it. And use objective language. And in closing, provide information about alternative if one exists, extra training, probation, whatever the case may be. If appropriate, describe what will happen next and look forward positively. And that is the end of chapter 7. And homework again is due Monday of week 8, which is the 3rd of March. And if you have any questions, please feel free to message me on Moodle or email.